What if I told you that the city once seen as the ultimate engine of ambition, the place where dreams were supposed to explode into reality, has quietly turned into one of the harshest environments for anyone trying to earn a living? What if the so-called land of opportunity now feels more like a survival arena where the reward for hard work is not prosperity, but exhaustion? New York still sells the slogan that anyone can make it here, but the people who actually keep the city alive know something different. Working in New York today means accepting a constant state of pressure, decline, and danger. Every corner reveals the same contradiction. Skyscrapers that symbolize wealth rise above streets that look increasingly abandoned. Corporate headquarters glow at night while workers rush through dim subway stations that smell of neglect. The myth of New York as the beating heart of the American dream is still powerful, but it is also becoming painfully hollow. Because behind the polished image, there is a brutal truth that the average worker feels every single day. The reality on the ground is not the glamorous hustle shown in movies, but a grinding struggle marked by soaring rent, decaying infrastructure, and a level of stress that chips away at your energy before the workday even starts. You wake up early not to chase opportunity, but to navigate delays, overcrowded trains, unpredictable streets, and a cost of living that consumes your paycheck before you even touch it. And while the city tries to keep up its reputation as a global powerhouse, the people who fuel that power are quietly reaching their breaking point. This is not just an economic crisis. It is a psychological one, a social one, a structural one. And the more you look closely, the more you understand why millions are rethinking the idea of working in New York at all. Because to survive here, you must accept living on the edge, balancing exhaustion, fear, and financial insecurity as if it were all part of the normal rhythm of life. But deep down, people know this is not normal. It is a warning sign of something larger happening across the United States. A sign that the illusion of endless opportunity is cracking under the weight of its own contradictions. Have you ever felt this shift yourself, or noticed how the city seems to demand more while giving less back? Your experience matters, and it actually helps shape how this story unfolds. So take a moment to share what you think in the comments. Leave a like if this resonates with you, and check whether you are subscribed so you do not miss what comes next. What you are about to discover might change the way you see the city entirely. And the next part of this deep dive will bring that picture into even sharper focus as we keep unraveling what working in New York truly means today. If working in New York already feels like stepping into a daily storm, what comes next is the deeper layer that most outsiders never see. Beneath the glamour of the skyline lies an economy built on imbalance, where the cost of simply staying alive grows faster than any salary can follow. The promise of opportunity still exists in theory, but in reality, the average worker spends more time calculating how to make it through the month than dreaming about any future. The financial pressure is not a background noise. It defines every decision, from where you live to what you eat to how long you can stay in the city before something breaks. The most brutal part is that the math no longer works. Wages that once felt competitive have been swallowed by skyrocketing rent, utilities that creep up month after month, and the relentless inflation woven into every product and service. A paycheck that used to mean progress now barely covers basic necessities. You finish working 10 hours, 12 hours, sometimes more, only to realize that the city has already claimed most of what you earned. It becomes a cycle that traps you in place, where you work harder but remain stuck on the same financial ledge. And this is not a rare story. It has become the new New York reality for millions. Grocery stores that once offered affordable staples now look like luxury boutiques. A simple meal out can eat through a chunk of your weekly budget. Even the public transportation that everyone depends on quietly raises fares while offering worse service. The survival economy forces you to shrink your life, not because you want to, but because the city leaves you no other option. Meanwhile, the narrative pushed by corporations and politicians insists that opportunity is everywhere, that New York rewards the ambitious, that prosperity is within reach if you only try hard enough. But workers see the contradiction daily. The gap between effort and reward widens every year. The city demands intensity, resilience, and sacrifice, yet gives back instability, unpredictability, and financial fragility. What used to be a ladder of social mobility now feels like a treadmill that speeds up without warning. Inside offices, cafes, retail stores, hospitals, and warehouses, You meet people who are exhausted not only by their jobs, but by the constant mental arithmetic of survival. The stress follows you home, it follows you to bed. It follows you into every future plan that becomes smaller and more cautious. You stop thinking about thriving and start thinking about staying afloat. That shift, subtle at first, becomes the core of life here. And as this survival economy tightens its grip, it changes the way the city feels. You walk through neighborhoods that once had energy and community, but now carry an undercurrent of tension. You sense how close people are to the edge, how thin the line is between coping and giving up. Even the smallest disruption feels heavier because the system leaves you no room to absorb the impact. A rent increase, a delayed paycheck, an unexpected bill can push everything into chaos. What is emerging in New York is not just a cost of living crisis, but a transformation of what work means, what daily life feels like, and how much a person can endure in a place designed to test limits. And this pressure does not exist in isolation. It spills into the next layer of the city's decline, where working becomes even more difficult not because of money alone, but because the infrastructure around you collapses at the same time. As the survival economy tightens around workers, another force pushes equally hard, from the opposite direction, making daily life feel even more fragile. It is the quiet, grinding deterioration of the physical systems that hold New York together. You feel it the moment you step outside, long before you reach work. The city that once prided itself on efficiency and constant movement is now defined by malfunction, delay, and decay. The collapse is not dramatic or sudden. It is slow, steady, and everywhere. You see it underground first. The subway, once the lifeline of the city, has become a symbol of its unraveling. Trains stall for minutes that turn into half an hour. Platforms grow dangerously overcrowded. Water leaks from ceilings older than most buildings in the country. An entire day can be thrown off because one signal light in one tunnel stopped working. And yet every year, fares rise as if commuters are paying for a service that no longer exists. For workers, the journey to work now feels like navigating a maze designed to waste time and drain energy. Above ground, the picture does not improve. Buses crawl through traffic that moves at the pace of a tired pedestrian. Streets that should be simple to cross are broken by potholes large enough to damage cars and force cyclists into dangerous paths. Sidewalks crumble, forcing crowds to zigzag through narrow passages that were never designed for the population the city now carries. Garbage piles on corners for days, adding to the sense of a place slipping away from any standard of order. Even essential services that once defined the reliability of New York are showing the same cracks. Electrical grids flicker during summer heat waves. Water systems struggle with aging pipes that burst without warning. Emergency response times stretch longer every year, leaving communities vulnerable when they need help most. For the average worker, this means a constant vulnerability. A simple power outage disrupts your workday. A burst pipe forces you to miss hours you cannot afford to lose. A stalled subway train means arriving late to a job where lateness is unforgiven. The deterioration also shapes the emotional landscape of the city. When infrastructure fails, people feel powerless. They lose trust in institutions meant to sustain their daily lives. They begin carrying backup plans for backup plans, knowing that nothing is guaranteed to function as expected. What used to be minor inconveniences now carry the weight of a serious threat because a fragile system leaves no margin for error. Disruption can unravel an entire week. The most striking part is that the decline does not discriminate by neighborhood. Even areas once seen as untouchable show signs of strain. Wealthy districts may hide the decay with cosmetic fixes, but the underlying systems face the same age and the same neglect. Workers who commute into these areas feel the contrast sharply. Polished lobbies and luxury storefronts surrounding streets and transit lines that are visibly falling apart. The collapse of infrastructure does more than slow the city down. It reshapes how people work, how they live, and how much they can endure. Every delay, every malfunction, every broken system chips away at the mental capacity needed to face an already overwhelming cost of living. And this layered exhaustion leads directly into the next pressure point that defines the struggle of working in New York today, one that touches the most intimate part of life, the place you are supposed to call home. When the systems outside your door are already crumbling, the last place you expect to feel pressure is inside your own home. Yet in New York, The crisis tightens even further the moment you cross that threshold. What should be a space of rest has become another arena of financial strain and emotional erosion. Workers enter their apartments not to recover, but to calculate survival. The housing crisis is no longer a distant political talking point. It is the daily reality shaping every moment of life in the city. Rent is the first blow. It rises with a kind of mechanical indifference, climbing month after month as if the city is testing how far a person can stretch before snapping. People sign leases knowing they are already too high, telling themselves they will figure it out later. But later never gets easier. The numbers only grow. In some neighborhoods, the price of a single bedroom rivals the cost of a mortgage anywhere else in the country. Families squeeze into smaller spaces. Strangers become roommates. Entire paychecks vanish into the hands of landlords before workers can even think about food or transportation. And despite these prices, the conditions inside these apartments often border on neglect. Mold creeping along ceilings, radiators that clang through the night, pest infestations that return no matter how often you treat them, buildings owned by absentee landlords who ignore repairs while raising rent. When basic maintenance becomes a luxury every day inside your own home feels like a reminder that stability is slipping through your fingers. Then there is the constant threat of displacement. A rent increase, a policy change, a new building owner, or simply the creeping expansion of gentrification can push workers out with little warning. You can spend years in a neighborhood, build connections, create routines, only to be priced out overnight. The city moves on without hesitation, erasing the people who gave it life and character. For workers, this instability becomes a quiet form of psychological pressure, a permanent uncertainty that turns every lease into a countdown. The emotional impact is heavier than most admit. Living with the fear of losing your home or paying for one that drains your willpower reshapes how you see the world. You start to measure everything by how much you can endure. You become hyper-aware of every noise, every draft, every maintenance issue because you know complaining might raise the risk of eviction. Stress follows you from room to room. Even rest becomes strategic, not restorative. And the cruelest part is how normalized all this has become. People talk about rent the way they talk about the weather, as if these pressures are natural forces rather than the result of a broken system. The housing crisis does not just limit workers financially, it steals their sense of safety. It takes away the one place where they should feel protected. It forces them to accept discomfort as the standard and instability as something inevitable. What emerges is a city where working hard does not guarantee a livable home, where the idea of comfort becomes something to admire in other people's windows, and where the simple act of resting requires navigating stress that never fully leaves. And when your home becomes part of the struggle, the impact spreads outward into every other area of life, shaping how you show up to work, how you interact with others, and how you imagine your future in a place that feels increasingly hostile. If you have ever lived through something like this, or felt the weight of a home that drains rather than restores, share your experience in the comments. Your voice helps reveal how widespread this has become and how deeply it affects the people who keep this city running. When your home becomes a source of pressure instead of relief, the next place you look for stability is your workplace. But in New York, that search often leads to another wall. The modern corporate culture that once attracted ambitious people from around the world has shifted into something far more corrosive. It is no longer the fast-paced environment that pushes you to grow, but an atmosphere built on constant pressure, unspoken fear, and a pace that grinds away at your sense of self. The idea of building a career has been replaced by the need to simply keep up. Inside offices and workplaces across the city, you feel this shift immediately. Expectations rise at the same speed that resources shrink. Teams grow smaller, workloads grow heavier, and the message is always the same. Be grateful you still have a job. What used to be occasional overtime has quietly turned into a permanent condition. Workers answer emails before the sun rises and after it sets. Not because they want to, but because the culture makes them believe slowing down is the first step toward being replaced. The psychological pressure becomes part of the routine. Workers move through their days measuring their words, softening their tone, double-checking every task out of fear that one mistake could jeopardize everything. Performance reviews become less about recognizing effort and more about identifying weaknesses that can be used to justify future cuts. Job security, once a reasonable expectation, now feels like a privilege that can disappear without explanation. The result is an unspoken anxiety that shadows every conversation and every meeting. And the culture reinforces this at every level. Companies promote the idea of resilience, flexibility, and dedication, but what they actually demand is submission to a system that feeds on exhaustion. You see it in the faces of coworkers who arrive drained and leave even more so. You feel it in the silence of break rooms where people avoid discussing how overwhelmed they are. You witness it in managers who themselves are crushed by top-down expectations they cannot meet. Everyone is trapped in the same cycle, pretending it is normal because admitting otherwise means confronting a reality no one knows how to escape. Even industries once known for creativity and collaboration have become dominated by metrics, deadlines, and relentless competition. The joy of doing meaningful work fades when every task becomes a race against time and every project feels like a test of endurance rather than skill. The pressure erodes not only motivation but identity. Workers begin to see themselves not as individuals with talents and goals, but as replaceable parts in a machine that never slows down. This environment also feeds a growing sense of isolation. Despite being surrounded by millions, workers feel increasingly disconnected from each other. Too tired to form bonds, too cautious to share vulnerabilities, too overwhelmed to invest in anything beyond immediate responsibilities. Even outside the office, you carry the weight of work with you. It follows you home, sits with you during dinner, interrupts your rest, and distorts your sense of time. Weekends no longer feel like recovery. They feel like brief pauses before the cycle begins again. The most alarming part is how deeply this toxic culture has woven itself into the city's identity. The intense, high-stakes, high-demand rhythm was once something people admired about New York. Now it is a burden that pushes workers to the edge long before they reach the goals that brought them here. And the more this pressure grows, the more it fuels the psychological strain already produced by housing insecurity, failing infrastructure, and the survival economy that defines daily life. As this culture spreads, it doesn't just change how people work. It changes who they become. It shapes their relationships, their energy, their dreams. And it paves the way for the next layer of decline, the part no workplace policy can fix, the emotional and psychological weight of a city that never slows down, even when its people desperately need it to. As the toxic work culture tightens, around every aspect of a worker's identity, something even heavier begins to grow beneath the surface. It is not always visible at first. It builds slowly, quietly, in the pauses between tasks, in the late nights when sleep refuses to come, in the mornings when your body wakes before your mind is ready. New York is a city that moves at a speed most humans were never meant to match, and the psychological toll of keeping up is one of the most profound burdens people carry without ever speaking about it openly. The pressure of constant productivity creeps into your thoughts until it becomes the rhythm of your day. Even when you're not working, your mind keeps running, calculating, anticipating, rehearsing. You walk through crowded streets feeling as if the noise outside mirrors the chaos inside your head. You sit on a train packed with strangers, each lost in their own exhaustion, and you can almost feel the tension radiating from them as if the entire city is breathing in short, shallow bursts. It becomes impossible to tell whether you're stressed because of the city or whether the city amplifies every stress you already carry. Loneliness grows even in the middle of millions. People rushing past you, coworkers who barely look up from their screens, neighbors who never make eye contact, friends too overwhelmed to meet. Conversations become shorter, more functional, less human. There is always a sense of being surrounded yet disconnected, as if everyone is living parallel lives that rarely intersect. The speed of the city does not bring people together. It pushes them into their own isolated bubbles where everyone is simply trying to cope. Anxiety becomes a constant companion. You feel it on the subway when delays threaten your arrival time. You feel it walking home after a long shift, scanning every corner because the streets feel unpredictable. You feel it late at night, wondering how long you can keep this pace before something in your mind or body gives out. The city demands focus and vigilance at every hour, leaving little room for rest in a place where the cost of slowing down is always felt immediately. Then comes the fatigue, a deep exhaustion that is not physical alone. It settles into your thoughts, into the way you speak, into the decisions you postpone because your mind no longer has the strength to process anything beyond immediate survival. You begin to forget what calm feels like. You forget what genuine rest feels like. You even forget that it was once normal to live without this intensity. The constant pressure acts like a weight hanging from your chest, pressing down day after day until numbness begins to feel like the only form of relief. New York was once celebrated for its energy, for the excitement that pulsed through every block. But for many workers, that energy now feels like an electrical current that never turns off. You are always alert, always defensive, always preparing for the next demand. Even moments of beauty become fleeting, drowned out by the constant mental strain. A sunset between buildings becomes a passing distraction. A quiet morning becomes rare, almost foreign. Your inner world contracts under the external noise. For many, this emotional exhaustion becomes one of the clearest signs of the city's decline. It is not just the infrastructure breaking, or the economy shifting, or the workplace becoming harsher. It is the slow, steady erosion of mental resilience, the feeling that the city is taking more from you than it gives back. And that psychological imbalance affects everything else in life. Your relationships, your confidence, your stability, your ability to imagine a future that feels larger than the next paycheck, or the next week of work. As this internal pressure builds, it intersects with something even larger happening across the city. A widening divide that no amount of effort can bridge. A social fracture that becomes more visible every day and reshapes how workers understand their place in New York. As the psychological strain tightens its grip on workers, another reality becomes impossible to ignore. It is the widening social fracture that stretches across New York like a fault line, dividing the city into two worlds that exist side by side but never truly meet. On one side are the workers carrying the weight of a system that demands everything from them. On the other side are those insulated by wealth, protected by neighborhoods and services, designed to keep discomfort at a distance. The contrast is so sharp that walking a few blocks can feel like crossing between different universes. You feel this fracture first in the way the city looks. In one direction, gleaming towers, luxury residential buildings, spotless storefronts, and private car services waiting at curbs. In the other, aging brick complexes, shuttered businesses, dimly lit streets, and people lining up outside food pantries before going to work. These realities coexist, but only one of them defines the daily experience of the majority. And the more the city changes, the clearer it becomes that this divide is no accident. It is the structural outcome of a place built to reward a few and drain the rest. Inside the workplace, the fracture takes another form. Executives celebrate profits while employees struggle to pay rent. Bonuses flow upward while workloads increase downward. The distance between those making decisions and those living with the consequences widens each year. Workers sit in meetings hearing phrases like efficiency, restructuring, and cost management. Knowing these words often translate into more pressure for them and more cushion for those above. It creates a quiet resentment that people rarely voice but always feel. A growing awareness that the city's economic engine runs on imbalance. The social fracture is also visible in access to stability. Healthcare, childcare, safe housing, reliable transportation, and basic services feel out of reach for the workers who need them most. Meanwhile, those with resources move through a version of New York where problems appear smaller, manageable, or even invisible. They live in areas with private security, reliable infrastructure, and amenities that soften the harshness of the city. The result is a place where people inhabit the same geography but not the same reality. Yet the deepest impact of this divide is emotional. Workers sense that no matter how hard they push, they cannot reach the level of security that others are born into or easily maintain. The city becomes a constant reminder of inequality, visible in every storefront with prices out of reach. Every luxury apartment rising while older buildings decay. Every polished lobby next to a block struggling with basic sanitation. It is not just a financial gap, it is a psychological one. It makes people feel smaller, less valued, as if the city has quietly decided who matters and who does not. This fracture reshapes community life. Neighborhoods that once felt cohesive become fragmented as long-time residents are priced out and replaced with people who see the area not as home, but as a temporary investment. Local shops vanish, replaced by chains that do not reflect the people who once lived there. The sense of belonging fades, replaced by transients. Workers find themselves surrounded by strangers who move through the city without connection to the place or the people keeping it alive. The social fabric thins until it feels like everyone is walking on threads that could snap at any moment. And as this divide grows, it reinforces every other struggle workers face. The survival economy becomes harsher when those at the top cannot relate to those at the bottom. The failing infrastructure becomes more painful when some areas receive upgrades, while others remain neglected. The toxic work culture becomes more suffocating when leadership is shielded from the consequences of their decisions. The psychological weight deepens when the city feels increasingly indifferent to the lives of the people who make it function. If you have ever felt this invisible divide shaping your days, or noticed moments where the city's imbalance becomes impossible to ignore, share your perspective in the comments. Your experiences reveal the layers of this fracture in ways statistics never could. As the divide between the protected and the exposed becomes clearer, another layer of tension shapes the experience of working in New York. It is the steady erosion of safety, a shift that workers feel long before it appears in any official statistic. You notice it first in subtle ways. In the way people walk faster at night, in the glances exchanged on quieter streets, in the sudden instinct to check over your shoulder before entering your building. Safety, once taken for granted, becomes something fragile, something that can be disrupted by a wrong turn, a delayed commute, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. For many workers, crime is not an abstract conversation about numbers. It is a daily calculation that influences every movement through the city. You wake up earlier to avoid certain train lines when they are most unpredictable. You choose longer routes because they feel safer. You avoid stations known for outages, not just because of delays, but because when the lights flicker and crowds thin, the atmosphere changes. What should be just another part of your routine becomes a quiet assessment of risk. Inside the subway, the shift is unmistakable. Platforms feel more tense, with crowded mornings giving way to uneasy evenings. Reports of disturbances, harassment, and unpredictable outbursts have become part of the city's background noise. Workers stand further from the edge, not out of habit, but out of caution. A single moment of chaos can ripple through an entire commute, leaving people shaken long after the incident passes. The very system designed to move millions efficiently now feels like a place where vigilance never turns off. Above ground, the streets reflect the same instability. Areas once filled with families, small businesses, and steady foot traffic now carry an air of volatility. Shops close earlier, people walk with their heads down. The sound of sirens has become so frequent that it no longer signals urgency but routine. Workers returning home after long shifts navigate blocks that feel different than they did a few years ago, with a sense of unpredictability that makes each step heavier. Even daylight does not erase the awareness that the city has become less predictable and more reactive. This constant alertness shapes how people move through their jobs as well. Service workers face rising aggression from customers overwhelmed by their own frustrations. Delivery workers navigate streets where theft and confrontation have become more common. Office workers leave buildings in groups because it feels safer than walking alone. The city's pulse, once energetic and bold, now runs with an undercurrent of caution. It changes how people think, how they plan, even how they breathe on their way to and from work. And the emotional toll is profound. Living with a sense of constant threat wears down resilience in ways that are difficult to describe but impossible to ignore. It amplifies the exhaustion already created by work, housing costs, and the survival economy. It heightens anxiety, intensifies stress, and erodes the small pockets of peace people try to carve out in their daily lives. When safety becomes uncertain, everything else feels heavier. Even simple routines demand mental energy that people no longer have. The city often tries to reassure itself with slogans about strength, resilience, and unity, but workers know reality more intimately. They see the empty storefronts, the dim corners of subway stations, the tension in crowds, the way people clutch their bags a little tighter. They feel the shift in the atmosphere long before policy catches up. They sense how quickly order can dissolve when a system is stretched too thin. This growing sense of insecurity does not exist in isolation. It feeds into the next stage of decline, where the institutions meant to support the public begin to falter under the same pressures, leaving workers to navigate a city where the responsibility for safety, stability, and survival increasingly falls on their own shoulders. As the sense of insecurity spreads through the city, another layer of decline becomes unavoidable. The slow disappearance of the public systems meant to protect, support, and stabilize the daily lives of workers. It is not a collapse that happens with dramatic announcements or sudden breakdowns. It happens quietly, piece by piece, until one day you realize the institutions you used to rely on have become unreliable themselves. The safety net that once made life in a demanding city manageable has thinned to the point of near invisibility. You see it most clearly in the places people turn to in moments of vulnerability. Hospitals overwhelmed with long wait times, understaffed departments, and aging facilities that struggle to keep up with the city's demands. Patients sit for hours in crowded emergency rooms, watching stretchers line hallways because there is no space left. Workers who depend on these services to stay healthy find themselves navigating a system that delays treatment, postpones appointments, and offers little reassurance that help will arrive when needed. Schools face similar strain. Classrooms packed beyond their intended capacity, teachers taking on more roles than any job description ever outlined, and buildings that show the weight of years without proper maintenance. Parents who work long hours rely on these institutions to provide structure and safety for their children, yet they see firsthand how stretched thin these systems have become. Even basic supplies become a challenge, turning education into yet another part of the city's infrastructure where scarcity overshadows potential. Sanitation, once a point of pride in certain areas, now reveals clear signs of decline. Trash sits longer on the sidewalks, and collections feel inconsistent. Overflowing bins become a common sight, adding to the atmosphere of disorder that already shapes so much of the city. For workers leaving early or returning late, these neglected corners signal more than poor maintenance. They reflect a city losing the ability to care for itself, one block at a time. Public assistance programs, too, have become harder to access. Workers who once found temporary relief through rental support, healthcare programs, or job assistance now encounter long delays, confusing requirements, and reduced availability. Offices that used to offer guidance are understaffed or overwhelmed. People in real need wait weeks for answers to questions that determine whether they can stay in their home, buy medication, or keep their family stable. The very systems designed to provide support instead amplify stress at a time when people have the least capacity to handle it. Transportation, long plagued by decay, also shows signs of administrative strain. Repairs take longer, updates arrive slower, and communication becomes inconsistent. The agencies responsible for maintaining mobility across the city seem caught between limited budgets, political pressure, and an infrastructure too old to modernize quickly. Workers feel this every day in the delays, the overcrowded buses, the malfunctioning elevators in stations that many depend on. The result is a sense of abandonment that compounds with every disrupted commute. All these failures combine to create a new kind of vulnerability. It is no longer just the high cost of living or the psychological weight of the city that shapes a worker's experience. It is the realization that the structures meant to provide stability no longer function as they should. A simple setback like a medical issue or a missed paycheck can cascade into something far more severe because the systems designed to cushion those blows have weakened. And when the foundation beneath everyday life becomes unpredictable, the entire city begins to feel like it is balancing on a fragile edge. This erosion of public services sets the stage for the final layer of decline, the moment when workers confront the question at the heart of New York's current transformation. How long can a city function when the people who keep it alive are stretched to their breaking point? When the support systems begin to fail, when safety becomes uncertain, when the cost of simply existing rises faster than any paycheck can follow, workers begin to see the city through a different lens. New York is still loud, still iconic, still a place where ambition once felt at home. But beneath the surface, the cracks have become impossible to ignore. What used to be a city of opportunity has shifted into a city that drains energy faster than people can rebuild it. The breaking point is not one moment, but a series of small fractures that eventually converge into a single realization. The system no longer works for the people who hold it together. You hear this in quiet conversations among coworkers who once dreamed of building long careers here, but now speak about leaving. You see it in the number of longtime residents packing their belongings and heading to places where stability does not require constant sacrifice. You feel it in the exhaustion that lingers even on days off, the sense that the city asks for more than you have to give. For many, The turning point comes when they understand that working harder will not unlock a better version of life here. The equation itself has changed. The illusions that once pulled people in are still displayed everywhere. Advertisements show the glamorous skyline. Companies boast about limitless possibilities. Politicians talk about resilience and revival. But workers live the truth daily, and the truth is made of subway delays, impossible rents, unsafe commutes, shrinking paychecks, and workplaces where burnout has become the unspoken norm. It is made of the sense that the city's vibrancy comes at the cost of the very people who keep it moving. And yet, this shift reveals something larger than New York alone. It exposes a deeper transformation happening across the United States, a warning sign about what happens when cities prioritize image over infrastructure, profit over people, and expansion over stability. New York becomes a mirror reflecting a broader American decline. The gap between the ideal and the real, between what the country says it is and what workers feel every day. The breaking point in New York is not just about one city, but about the trajectory of an entire system reaching its limits. Still, people try to hold on. They push through long days, navigate failing services, adapt to rising costs, and hope the city might eventually balance itself again. Some stay because they have roots. Others stay because leaving feels like giving up on a past version of themselves. Many stay because they believe that even in decline, New York has a pulse unlike anywhere else. But beneath that pulse, the pressure continues to rise, reshaping what it means to work, live, and survive here. As these layers of collapse stack on top of each other, the question becomes unavoidable. How much longer can workers carry the weight of a city that no longer carries them in return? That tension defines the present moment. It shapes every commute, every shift, every rent payment, every late-night thought about whether this life is sustainable. The breaking point is not an event on the horizon. It is what people are living right now, in real time, across every borough and every industry. If you reached this point of the video, tell me in the comments by writing the phrase "I am with you" until the end. It helps me understand who is truly connecting with this conversation and living a reality shaped by these pressures. And if this deep dive brought you clarity or made you see things differently, consider subscribing so you can follow the next chapters of this discussion. Your support helps us continue exploring the stories that often go unnoticed. A like from you also helps this message reach more people who feel the same weight but do not yet have the words for it. And if you want to keep going, there is another video right here that expands this topic in a way that connects perfectly with everything we uncovered. Click and continue conmigo on the next part of this exploration.